many months, perhaps. I've just given an alert that recording is part so
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to turn it on
yeah.
as usual.
Anyway, this process went on uninterrupted for a year or more, um, and uh, uh, and it was something that I was very busy at the time. I had a young family. I'd gotten into the army in 71. Had a busy law practice. Was working 14, 15 hours a day with that, and we'd get home late at night. I usually reserved the study time for this pursuit from midnight to 3 a.m. Then I would get up at 6 and be at the office by 7 and do the day all over again. And on the weekends, we had a house in the fan that we were renovating. My first wife and I would work on that, and so it was a pretty busy schedule, and with two young babies, um, and and so this went on week after week, month after month, and somewhere in the range of the latter part of 70, maybe 73, early 74, um, I I was given a message, and I was reading the Richmond Public Library dry. I mean, and some books I was going back to reread to try to better understand what I was reading and so forth. I read a lot of Einstein's books, which of course not about quantum work so much, but just to try to understand the whole situation. And and so in sometime in late 74 or early, sometime in early 74, I got a message to move over to study linguistics. I didn't know what the heck, I didn't even hardly know what linguistics was at the time. Um, but I started reading books on linguistics and found that was just about as difficult to parse as quantum physics. and 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 several months into that, in 1974, I was up one night around 2:30 in the morning reading a book, one of Noam Chomsky's book about universal grammar and so forth. And he was the linguistics genius of that era. And um, and and it, as I was reading it, I had a unity consciousness experience. The first I had, in which uh, for whatever, I don't know exactly how long it lasted, a few minutes. But I went into an altered state, and the page disappeared, and in the course of all that, I saw that there was a vectors of lines of force where science in the West was going to connect with philosophy in the East, Hinduism, etc., with quantum physics, and that they were all going to the same endpoint, and from what I saw, that endpoint was a realm of a purely experiential realm that was not going to be um, apprehensible intellectually, or comprehensible intellectually, and that it would be, like pointing at the moon versus visiting the moon. You could point at it, but you would to visit it, you would have to be a mystical type experience, and that's where science is going, and the philosophy was pretty much already there, but the two would cross, and there would be a synergy there that would add value to both enterprises. And so then my guidance was, now this is why you've been directed for the last year and a half whatever it had been to do the study. Now it's time for you to write all this down. And and so I started working at that, and I found I was even more incompetent at that than I had been at trying to figure out what all the stuff was about when I was reading it. But nevertheless, I felt like I was being guided, so I felt like it was somehow important, and I worked at it and worked at it. Again, my regime was 12 to 3, during weekdays and a.m. and it was not not going fast and when I would reread what I was writing, I wasn't very pleased with it, I must say. But it went on for most of a year, and I probably had somewhere more than 25,000, less than 50,000 words on yellow pads written out. And and one night in December of 1975, my wife, my first wife, and I were in a bookstore in the area near where we lived. It was next to a delicatessen um, called the New York Delicatessen that we would eat at every Wednesday night. And there was a bookstore a couple of doors down called the Beacon Bookstore. At that time, it was sort of the hub bookstore in this part of Richmond, and and we would go in there and browse through titles after eating and spend a few minutes and then go home. And so we were in there that night in mid-December, 14th of December, something like that. And and I saw a book on books on the bookcase on the shelf of books for sale, and it so startled me that I uttered without thinking, "God damn!" and loud enough for everyone in the entire store to hear me. And my I was standing at 6 feet from the bookshelf, and my wife came from across the store and got behind me kind of carefully and put her hand softly on my shoulder and said, "Darling, are you all right?" And I said, and I pointed to the bookshelf and I said, "That son of a bitch has written my book." And I and and what was it was the first publication in December of 1975 of Friedhof Capra's book called The Tao of Physics. And when what I realized, of course I bought it and immediately read it, and I realized I mean, he was an actual physicist, and he had gone around and actually met with all the living people whose books I'd been reading. He'd gone and met with Werner Heisenberg and all these people and so forth. Um, and it wasn't the same book I was writing exactly, but it was on the same subject. And he was writing it more from a physicist perspective, and I was writing it more from the perspective of philosophy. But what I realized was that we were both tapping into the same what Rupert Sheldrake would later call the morphogenetic field. The information was there, and the time was right for it to be downloaded to those who had eyes to see and ears to hear. And so I was as much struck, maybe more struck with that consciousness was there for all, and that we were somehow both tapped into it. It was about a year and a half later that Gary Zukov came out with the Dancing Woolly Masses. He had been doing exactly the same thing at the same time because he also had tapped into the same idea factory in the sky, and the what I what I referred to in the flyer for this meeting as the one consciousness, and and uh, and that's why I bring up the story because that what I the reason I think the story makes sense right now in the context of this talk, in the context of the flyer, is that for the first time that I can recall, we do have a at least a at least an element of the scientific community that is in fact connecting with this with this in the same way that I was shown in that unity consciousness experience of almost 50 years ago, maybe a little more. I guess it's out a little more than 50. Well, it's about 50 years, plus or minus 50. And um, and that is you have Donald Hoffman, who is I think his basic training is in psychology, but he knows an awful lot about physics and all sorts of other sciences, biology as well. And Hoffman wrote a wonderful book back in 2019, which is um, still being poo-pooed by a lot of classical scientists, physicists, including quantum physicists, called "The Case Against Reality." And and his perspective is that instead of space and time being elemental aspects of creation, that the only thing there is in creation is consciousness. At least from this perspective of what we can know, that the only substance consciousness ever comes into contact with is itself, and that is essentially the same, with maybe in slightly different language. It's essentially the same position as Vajrayana Vajrayana Buddhism, which says all is spirit. And I would say a in terms of bibliography, if you want to go compare the works of Rupert Spira, I think he pronounces it Spira, Spira, who wrote a wonderful book uh, last year called "You Are the Happiness You Seek." Um, it is his work is he speaks from a philosophical perspective, really the same language that Hoffman speaks, purely scientific perspective. And what the idea is that instead of consciousness, which being an emergent property of physicality, which what used to be the materialist idea, now it's that what used to be called materialism, or in philosophical terms, existentialism, is now referred to as physicalism, which is kind of like existentialism light. It's existentialism without the philosophical angst of the eternal return. And but in any event, in physicalism, the idea is that consciousness is somehow an emergent property of sentient beings, of physical beings, of physicalness at a certain level. And it's just really it's just an ephemeral quality of it's a of the brain more than anything else. Whereas in from Hoffman's perspective, the entire what we perceive as the physical world is merely an emergent property of consciousness, and time and space are merely emergent properties. They're epiphenomena, if you will, of consciousness, and not not the other way around. And interestingly enough, according to Hoffman, I don't know enough of science to speak to this one way or the other, but this is this stuff is apparently can be proven from a scientific perspective using all sorts of mathematical formulae and so forth. And so it really is for those who are involved in this something that's a exciting new field. And I say it's exactly what was part of my experience of 50 years ago. Um, and so that's why I bring it up here. And I bring it up here too because to me, the idea that all is consciousness. And if you think about it, Rupert Spira is a wonderful spokesperson for this from a philosophical perspective, And Hoffman is a wonderful one from the scientific perspective. I would invite all of you to the many, they're all over YouTube in various lectures and so both of them are. And Inspira is doing seminars and so forth, retreats for a week at a time and so forth, both here in the UK and other places. But I have not attended any of them, but if I had the time, and well, I'd love to do it. Although I doubt he will continue to do it for so long because he's becoming a guru, and think he's a, I think he's in a far enough post-egoic stage of his development that the last thing he wants is to be a guru, and so he probably will move on to something else. He was a potter before he became a philosophical um, speaker, and who knows where he'll go to next. But he's only in his early 60s, so he's got lots of time on his hands potentially. In any event, the reason I bring it up and the reason I bring it up in this context is that in the flyer I made in the opening statement, I said there's only one consciousness in creation, and each of us is a unique aspect and divine spark of this all-encompassing whole. Now, I would say that's a misstatement in a way because instead of only one consciousness, there is in creation. Creation is a consciousness. That's all it is. Everything within creation is a consciousness of which each of us is a part. And so creation is 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 uh, is is the divine. It encompasses everything. We're all part of it. And to my way of thinking, hello, Van Dorn, glad to have you. To my way of thinking, that is, especially in the terms that it's discussed by both of these individuals, who are both outstanding and very, very articulate um, speakers for their positions, way more than I could ever be. Um, these individuals bring these ideas forth in a way that are very, very easy to grasp. We like to think about things in terms of oneness and so forth, but it's such a cloudy, ephemeral, um, unapproachable idea. But when we think of all reality, all creation, all of everything that we can imagine, all space, all time is nothing but consciousness. That's all it is, and it's only one consciousness. And we think of it in terms of the fact that the only substance consciousness ever comes into contact with is itself, and that each of us is a part of that consciousness, and everything we connect with, from our closest loved ones to our most uh, those that we abhor the most, to animals that we're afraid of in the woods, like grizzly bears and werewolves and whatever they might be. They're all part of that same consciousness. Anna Maria, how you doing? Good to see you. And and that for me, it may not for others, but it brings that reality home in a way, that concept of connection. Um, and what these physical bodies are avatars for that consciousness. Just like in the movie Avatar, when the guy who is crippled is presenting himself through this thing. We at the higher levels of our being or beingness are are um, are are operating these things that we call bodies, and it's just we're these bodies at the level of the divine are just as impermanent as the shirt I'm wearing tonight and anything else. So, um, but anyway, now that's I say that as a precursor to the subject of beliefs and letting go of limiting beliefs because the these are in a way beliefs. These are issues of belief and so forth, and we are all we're all programmed to have believe in certain ways, and that programming begins probably before we're born. It begins with the fears and hopes and aspirations and feelings of helplessness and limitation of our own parents in the womb. It probably begins even in the pre-birth realm before we even are conceived. We have limited ideas at the soul level as to what can be accomplished in a physical life, and so and so I don't know for a fact that that's the case, but I would expect that's the case because I expect that it's at levels, even at the levels that most of us refer to as heaven, there are limitations that are being imposed that are not necessary, not needed for our growth, but designed to entrain us in a certain direction. Um, and when you look at what beliefs are ideas that we have about things which we do not have knowledge of. They're ideas that we have which we most often attach some emotional charge of some kind. Um, and uh, and the chances are that almost all the beliefs that we've ever had were, if not wrong, at least distorted in some significant way. When we're small children, we believe our to the extent we have beliefs. When we're just in the crib, we're pure experience. But when we start to develop a sense of self at all, we look upon our parents as if they know everything and so forth, and that is we form beliefs around it, and what we learn over time with some of well, is that many of our beliefs are wrong. I would submit that it's hard to find a belief about anything that isn't wrong. I mean, if it's not wrong today, it's going to be wrong at some point. And I mean, we think of so many things as fixed that are not. Um, in our time of the last 30 to 40 years anyway, in the consciousness movement or the New Age movement or whatever it should be called, the ego has become a real bogeyman. Oh, yeah, the ego is bad. Got to get past that or get rid of it or put it away or whatever. And the ego itself is a structure of consciousness, like beliefs are, and it's not something that's part of human nature as such. It's just an evolutionary. It's like a stage of development, and there are pre-egoic stages of evolution and development, and there are egoic stages of evolution, and then presumably, if the human experiment on Earth does not self-destruct before we evolve further, there will be post-egoic stages of evolution. And but the evolution, the ego is a is a way of us experiencing the sense of separation and the sense of individuality that is not possible in a pre-egoic state. And so, although in modern psychology we think of it as natural, but if you were to go into some of the more indigenous tribal, which are oriented more to group dynamics, they're pre-egoic. Even there's some still on Earth today that are like. Historically, all of us, all peoples on our planet went through that stage, and so and the fact that we're deeply ensconced in egoic consciousness today does not mean that we will not be beyond it at some point in the future. So, but from the time we're born, we are, and before, we are bombarded with with uh, beliefs about our limitations, and 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 we're bombarded with rules and regulations and so forth. Um, One of our members on SOE who gave a talk a couple of months ago, and who gave a wonderful talk for Ions last year, I believe. Um, Ryan Chappell came up with a whole list of qualities that he talked about in his Ions talk, which really is a wonderful list. He posted it in his talk, and it can be seen by going to his talk, which recorded on our YouTube channel and on Facebook. But he had a long menu of qualities that were what he described as the ladder of emotional qualities and characteristics of the plane of information and form, which is basically the 3D, third dimensional plane we're in now, third density in raw terms, and among these are things like loyalty, uh, uh, jealousy, confusion, resentment, stubbornness. The negative side: resentment, stubbornness, anger, hatred, despair, desperation, ingratitude, unworthiness. That's a big one that we're taught from almost from the time we're born, that we're not worthy of this, we're not worthy of that. We're dependent on on uh, on higher powers to be given authority to be, and so forth and so on. I remember when I went to a private school as a child, and the school motto was a was from, I can't remember the psalm it's from, but it was, uh, Steve might remember because he went to the same school. Um, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And I remember from the time I was 5 years old and first saw that, it's from the Old Testament. When I first saw that, I thought that, I mean, I didn't think of it in these exact words, but I thought that's the biggest bunch of BS I've ever heard in my life. You know, fear of the Lord is beginning of wisdom. Come on, and it but that was the perspective from which the school operated, and that we only are what we are because somebody else gives us authority to have what we have, and or be what we are, um, and uh, and that we should and that we should cower in the face of that authority, as Robert Bushman spoke very eloquently in his Ion talk a couple of months ago, and I see Robert's on here tonight. Um, the idea of the word worship, when it's going back and translated into the not Sanskrit, but the Robert, help me here. The uh,
Sumerian.
oh man, huh? The
Sumerian.
Sumerian text. Yeah, I was having a brain fart. Excuse me. Um, the it comes out as work. So to worship a God means that's the Lord that you work for. That's who owns you. That's the slave master. And so worship is a concept that is specifically within the framework of 3D, and it is one designed to keep everybody in a limited state, and um, so these are these are ideas or beliefs that we are entrained to at a very, very young age. Um, and the Ryan in this thing came up with another group of characteristics that he called the ladder of emotional qualities and characteristics of the plane of being and playfulness, which were things like unconditional love, devotion, bliss, awe, generosity, joy. I would put joy at the top, actually, but openness, abandon, play, or he says authentic play, authentic humor, um, and so forth and so on. You see the difference. There's a lighter aspect of all these qualities, a less judgmental aspect, less limited aspect, more there's a finite aspect the 3D list. There's an infinite aspect to the 5D list, and and so what we're stuck with are beliefs that are entrenched in limitation, and we are trained to that from like I say, from the moment of conception and probably before we even come as come to Earth, on our various lives, um, and and so one of the people, as I mentioned a month or so ago, when I think Susanna was talking, that has worked specifically with beliefs and done a really outstanding job in terms of her process is a woman named Byron Katie. She's been around in the spiritual community for 35, 40 years. And her most seminal book is the one called The Work. But she's written a number of them, and they all revolve around the same ideas. Um, and in her books, she uh, she talks about before she takes beliefs and I'll say this in the way that what she talks about does not necessarily apply to what I'm talking about, although they're the ideas are still they're still applicable um, uh, in just in a different way. Most of her stuff is directed towards issues that people have within the framework of personal relationships. uh, family relationships, romantic relationships, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, those are actually wonderful fertile grounds for enlightenment. I had another unity consciousness experience in 1989 where I got a download to the effect that relationships within the framework of the West were the equivalent of monastic pursuits within within the East in India, Tibet, and so forth. Um, and uh, and just like truth, truth is one path of many. This our path to enlightenment will be and often can be through relationship. Um, but what Byron Katie has is a process where when in terms of beliefs, she she poses or presents the idea that they should be attacked with what she four questions. The first question is it true? Whatever belief you have. And of course, a lot of beliefs we have about ultimate concerns, we don't know whether it's true or not. And we can probably assume it's not and be right most of the time. But 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 in any event, and this there's exercises that are written up on the internet about her this being applied in relationships where one partner believes another partner is fooling around, that sort of thing. Um, Number two question is, can you absolutely know that it is true? In other words, you think is it true? That's the first level of that is you think it might be, and you don't know. Um, Second level is, can you absolutely know it's true? This is but a belief. And so if it's a belief, by definition, you cannot know it's true. You can suspect it's true, you can think it's true, you can do all kinds of things, but you cannot know it's true if you only think if it's only a belief. And number three is, how do you react to the belief or the thought that is that this is, and so you can examine yourself in respect to that. If you just let's take the one I presented, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. How does that make you feel? Does that make you feel expanded, or does it make you feel contracted? Does it make you feel warm and fuzzy, or does it make you feel like you're off in a corner in on time out or whatever? Does it make you feel good? Does it make you feel bad? And uh, and 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 so most of the time when we're examining a belief on this kind of basis, it's going to be a limiting belief, and the answer to that question is going to be mostly in the negative side. And so, well, the fourth question she poses is, what would you be without that belief? Who would you be without that belief? What if you let that belief go? What difference does it make in your life? And that is really the critical aspect. And so I can present a personal story in relationship to my own family in this regard. Um, my younger brother, who passed away in 2021, um, had a global neuropathy, combination of a congenital issue called Charcot-Marie-Tooth syndrome, which is a peripheral neuropathy, with with according to channeling. And the medical community, some of those I know in it support this hypothesis. Um, so I'm telling it to you as a hypothesis because I don't know and I have a belief about it either way. But I think it was in conjunction with a case of polio. I had polio when I was 2.5, and he in 1946, and he was just a few months old. And my hypothesis is, and again, it's supported by channeling information, is that he contracted a very mild case at that time that was so mild it went unknown and undetected. I was in the household and was being treated actively for polio. Went through about 3 weeks of sustained high fevers of 105, 107, and so forth. And to keep those as under control as possible, my mother, grandmother, and my father, when he was home from work, he was a physician himself, would keep me in a tub of running cold water with one of them in it with me at all times to try to prevent me from suffering the paralysis that was often attendant polio. And and so what my brothers started in his arms and hands and feet, and went to his entire body, all the organs in his body, and so forth. He was in a wheelchair for the last 35 plus years of his life, and was frankly very lucky to have survived as long as he did. He made almost 75. But what it the congenital problem was one that was not no neurologist that he ever was seen by had ever seen a congenital issue of the diagnosis he had that was anything like as serious as what he was experiencing. And but what he experienced was also very, very consistent with what was being discovered in the late 50s and early 60s as post-polio syndrome, where people would have polio and not have paralysis, and then would start having mild and sheath breakdowns 15, 20, even 25 and 30 years later, and become uh, compromised in that way. And so I don't again, I don't know whether that combination that I hypothesized is accurate or not, but it is consistent with what was manifested it has been conceptually agreed to by a couple of neurologists who knew him very intimately, that were really excellent neurologists and still are. And it also has been supported by channeling information. Now, when my brother was back in the 70s, and when he was this started coming on him when he was 16, 17 years old. And so in the 70s, he was in his 20s. And and I told him, I said, um, you in my view of the world, you can choose to have this experience or you can choose to have some other experience. And um, and and you could conceivably we could take some steps to let you relieve yourself. And it's not there's no pills to take, there's no surgery you can do, but there are potential processes where you could move beyond this and not have it anymore. And um, and and frankly, I've been given channeling information to the fact that the only reason I didn't have it was because it was my choice not to experience it. And so that was one of the reasons that I thought that he could choose otherwise himself if he wanted. His response was, if I didn't have this, I would not know who I am. This is who I am. And so it was this was a belief from his standpoint of his identity. And I it's not for me to judge him on it. Um, my all of my guidance has been to the effect that the queue lines in heaven are much longer um, for people lining up to experience lives of extreme physical difficulty or even mental difficulty. So, like uh, uh, Mongolism and that sort of thing, and Down syndrome, and because it enables the soul to express itself more directly. It's less in a way that is where there are less distractions. Shiny objects don't get in the way of the soul expressing itself in a way that is more aligned with the person than is the case or can be the case if the uh, if the uh, uh, if the person has greater mobility. So quadriplegia and all sorts of things that are difficult for us to imagine as desirable from our perspective are very desirable from the standpoint of the higher consciousness of our soul, our being. And and as I've all of you've heard me speak before, you've heard me say that the agenda of and the value system that our soul would apply to us not exactly the same as we would apply at the personal level, at the level of personality. Or that if we have all sorts of things that we consider to be wonderful or terrible events and suffering and so and the soul makes no judgment about that whatsoever, except that that's a learning experience, an experience that creates an opportunity for expansion. And every experience has value from the perspective of higher consciousness, no matter how awful it may seem to from our own consciousness. Um, so, so my brother had a belief that in a way, from the standpoint of his physical presentation, was limiting. And that was that if he was fully embodied and not crippled and not paralyzed, that he wouldn't know who he was because he was so fully identified in his mind with his physical incapacity. But um, that that's a mixed bag in that one because as I said, he had an absolutely wonderful life in every measurable way, other than his physical difficulties, and he left an incredibly wonderful legacy of a family and people. He's a teacher until he died, and so forth. But in any event, it is um, it is an example of limitation, and I think from the standpoint of our being all integral parts of a single consciousness, a single beingness at a grand level, which includes everything in creation, even the pests that we have terminics come and try to get rid of in our homes. So um, um, that it is something that we are. It's an easy way for us to connect and uh, and and those things which do limit us. And you see all kinds of limitations in our political sphere these days. Um, all sorts of um, very entrenched beliefs. All of them, all of them are not all of them, but a great many of them, us versus them, and so forth and so on. And you don't have to be on either side to know that this kind of outlook is much more limiting than it needs to be. That and that if that there is a pathway forward, where people could expand their horizons beyond judgment and beyond all this, by letting go of these limiting beliefs. Um, we also uh, um, well, I think I've run out of steam for a minute. Does anybody have any uh, thing to discuss or questions or anything? Robert, take your mute off.
Okay, it's off.
Thank you. Have you got anything you want to talk about?
Interesting you should talk about this. I just met an old high school friend who had become severely disabled.
Hmm.
And it was really a shame to see how disabled she was in her life now
Right.
compared to what she used to be. I mean, she used to be a dancer,
Wow.
uh, and now she's got half of her body paralyzed. Well, I
Mm.
couldn't help but think that there had to be an upside to that somewhere, and was wondering whether she realized what the upside was. And I asked her, uh, but drew a blank. She had not considered that.
Wow.
But I want to pursue it with her though, because I think there's something there, a value.
Well, I would totally agree with you. My late wife Christina was, for the last 6 months of her life, was paralyzed from the mid chest or lower chest down, and and it didn't make her stop wanting to buy things from Saks, but she's it still it did give her a degree of experience and awareness that she never had before, and it certainly gave us some degrees of intimacy that we never had before, not necessarily ones you would reach out and want to have when somebody cannot turn over in the bed and can't clean themselves and all that sort of thing. But nevertheless, it's another form of experience, and it has its value. And I think, and it was certainly one of great value for her as well. It was a way of it presented all kinds of ways to express love that were otherwise would not have been experienced between us. And so anybody who's in a state of incapacity like that will create those opportunities.
Yes.
Susanna?
So, Spirit once told me that, first a comment, then a question. Spirit once told me that people,
Comments are allowed.
okay, that's good. I would have offered one anyway.
Okay.
Spirit once told me that those who cannot care for themselves are the most fortunate because it's required that others care for them. So they have to be
Right,
cared for by other people. So they are
right.
most fortunate. Which I thought was beautiful. And also flips the narrative as you kind of that you alluded to with your comment about people with a disability. So my question is putting together this idea that we are all one consciousness. So if we are all one consciousness, then what do you feel is the purpose of these limiting beliefs within that one consciousness? Like, why do we have them?
Well, I think it again. I put it in the framework of it being a developmental stage that we're in, and an evolutionary stage, developmental stage, and I do think that there are beings that are out there that have helped us direct us uh, and have manipulated us um, over the course of human history, who would just as soon we remained at this relatively lower level. Um, but whether that's true or not, I think that I don't know that for certain, but that again, that's all that stuff about the Anunnaki and which I've gotten confirmation from a number of different channels about that. That's not by itself a sufficient basis to say it's true, but in any event, um, there are periods of growth where there are limitations. If you look at the analogy of a human life, um, you have you have periods of childhood where there are nurturing periods that the child needs the nurture of parents and family and so forth, and then gets older and all that, and uh, and there are controls that are imposed, and when you get to the stage of adolescence, there are periods where there's a natural tension that develops as the child is reaching towards a state where it can sustain at least partially on its own. And I remember a I remember a an episode that happened with my son back in when he was 16 years old. He was my first wife and I were separated in the process of a divorce, and my son was working summer of the year he was 16 as a runner for my law firm, and so he was driving around all day long, delivering uh, papers and packages and so forth, and uh, and so one Friday, you typically we get together for about 5 minutes at the end of the workday on Friday and talk about what he was going to do for the weekend and so forth and so on. And and so that one particular Friday that summer, I said, "What are you doing this weekend?" He said, "Well, a couple of friends and I are going up to visit so and so who's up at Woodbury Forest, a boarding school up in Orange County, Virginia, uh, uh, on tomorrow and probably spend the night up there and come back Sunday." And so I said, "Great, we'll have fun, and I'll see you Monday." And the following morning, I got a message from a strange wife saying, "Oh, by the way, there's some books over here that you left behind. That if you want them, come get them today. Because if you don't pick them up today, I'm going to put them in the trash." I said, "Oh, okay. I didn't even know they were there. I'll be right over." And so that afternoon, I went over and to pick them up, and there was a few boxes, and as I was we're in a garage she had, as I was packing them into the trailer, all of a sudden it was about 3 or 4 in the afternoon. My son came in, and I said, I thought you were up at Woodbury. He says, well, no. I said, well, what happened? He says, well, and it was a kind of a drizzling rain that day. It wasn't much. He says, well, Mom didn't want me to go because it was raining, and she said the roads would be slick. I said, okay, fine. So I said, come see me Monday morning. And so Monday morning he came in and says, what do you want? I said, well, I said, I'm never going to try to countermand anything your mother tells you, and I hope she wouldn't do the same with me either, or would be the same with me. But we as your parents have a we have a duty to get you into adulthood in one piece as best we can. That's job number one. And job number two is to make sure you grow up and are educated and all that sort of, and are healthy as best we can help you. But I said, you have a job too, and that is to grow up. And when you get into the age that you're at, those two agendas are in conflict with each other sometimes. And it's your obligation to resist instructions from your parents, whether it comes from your mother or from me, that conflict with what you want to do if you think what you want to do is a safe undertaking. And so, if I tell you I don't want you to do something because there's rain on the road and it's too slick, just tell me to go to hell and get in the car and go do it. And do the same with your mom. I'm not ever going to countermand what she says, but you have your own job to do, and it is to grow up despite the interference of your parents. And
Well,
so
I like that story, Tom, because I think when people would hear there are these beings that are trying to prevent us, like it just sounds paranoid and sinister, and it's a natural relational tendency to have this balance. And I would also say, like, I also feel like a lot of what we are doing in our incarnations is physiology. And
right,
in physiology, there's stimulants and there's inhibitors, and you don't have
right,
just stimulation. You have to have that regulation, that sort of the back and forth. And
right.
there's sometimes the paranoia type interpretations really concern me. Thank you.
Oh yeah, but anyway, so we have these stages we're going through, and that's a stage of adolescence that I was just talking about. But as a species, we also have stages of growth and evolution. And so we are, I think, at a stage where we're either gonna grow further from where we are, or we're gonna stay where we are and potentially regress. The more we stay where we are, and the more we develop more advanced technologies, the greater the chance that the human experiment on Earth will come to an end. As the Hopi say, we're in the fourth world. This one will end. We'll have to go to a fifth world before we can evolve beyond it. But I think there are points. There are all the indications from connections with both spiritual beings and more advanced beings from other planets and so forth, or that there's lots of development that we haven't reached yet that we can reach, and the way we get there is to expand our horizons, and we engage in expansion rather than contraction. We let go of beliefs that contract. We let go of beliefs that tell us that we can't do this and we can't do that. So, does that make sense? Yes, Lawrence.
I'd like to address that because I've become more open to what is now brought to us through the technology of so-called artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
that may indeed help us to look into our genetic memory and see what lessons we're meant to learn along the way of reincarnations that have not been resolved, so that we may now, with a higher level of consciousness, address those head on, in order that we move into the higher level of being, rather than having to keep repeating the endless evolution of humanity in a repetitive, old-fashioned, epic way.
Right.
And become what Barbara Marx Hubbard has said. God, I remember her saying that, 40 years ago. We humans are evolving to become Homo universalis. And that
Yeah.
is, we are here to participate in the co-creation with the source of all life as one.
Right.
We are said we are as truly one. And as we are, I think, meant to be, because it seems like it's a natural part of the grand design that co-creation takes on the synergy of a collective consciousness, which is why I think what I think we're being shown.
Well, I agree. I don't know enough about AI to have an opinion on whether that's going to assist us in our evolution. I suppose it can.
And
There's certainly many people who talk about AI being, another some demonic element and so forth, and certainly it can be used for bad or bad or good, whatever. But
everything has a potential to be either one
right,
extreme or the other,
absolutely,
according to the way we observe it, right?
right,
If we observe it as a potential advantage, then we will be looking for the proper application of those
right,
technologies.
right,
Otherwise, they will be like atom bombs in our hands, where
right,
we can destroy all life,
right,
whereas we could also use them to enhance all of life.
right.
That's a
Exactly.
conscious choice.
No, I totally agree with that. And again, no matter how negative something may seem to us at the personal level, it will never be that way at the higher level of our consciousness, of our
Right,
of our higher self, our soul, our beingness, and so forth.
right,
It's that there's always value found at that level.
right, right. Thank you. I want to just also mention that your awakening in the early part of 1974, I had chills running down my spine. My hair, what's left of it, was standing on end, because that's exactly when I had an enormous awakening. In fact, it was while I was living in San Francisco, directly following the EST training that
Oh
Werner
wow!
had delivered himself. And
Well,
when I look,
Scientology was not big enough for what's his name, Ron L. Ron Hubbard and Werner Erhard both. So one of them had to go, right?
yeah. So anyway, um,
No religion could contain two such large egos. Although I have to say that EST did have a lot of good stuff.
oh, absolutely, it
Yeah,
did.
yeah,
Well, it was a scary thing at first, because it was a hero's journey, facing the potential that indeed what I saw in the mirror was my own creation, right down to the cellular level. And I was thinking, oh my God, if this
right,
is indeed true,
right.
then what questions do I need to be asking that I have been ignoring?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, Anybody else? Or is that all you have, Lon?
That's it.
I've got a couple of things I want to, and you all have heard me go through some of this before, but but I think it has bearing here in terms of this discussion. And these are sayings of Rupert Spira, but they're ones that would be completely subscribed to by Donald Hoffman. One is the world, the universe, all of creation exists only in your consciousness. Only in your consciousness.
Right.
We have no evidence that anything we see around us exists anywhere except in our consciousness.
Right.
I mean, we can beat all kinds of drums and play all kinds of music. Van Dorn, unmute.
Yeah, okay. Let me try that. It says that we're unmuted.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay, go
You're
ahead.
good now.
The problem that we have with this conversation, talking about consciousness, is that all is consciousness. Everything is consciousness. There's no
Right.
out there. So they're basically saying there's no such thing as out there, because what we are is out there and in here at the same time.
That's right.
Yeah.
There is nothing else.
Yeah. So the problem I have with the way it's articulated is that I don't hear it articulated the way I just spoke it. So it sounds like some gobbledygook when I hear some of these individuals speak about it, because they don't lay it out. I'm talking about the name that you spoke, especially Donald Hoffman or whatever his name is.
Mm-hmm.
I run from those people because of the way they articulate the position or the concept. It appears to be somewhat limited for me personally.
Okay, all right.
But I respect what you just said and what you've said the whole time, because
Right.
it is all consciousness. We are consciousness.
Right, right. We're conscious of nothing but.
And the filters that we use as partitions are just that, filters that we use as partitions.
We each have.
And we have these partitions that come with the experience. And when we remove the partitions, then we have this aha moment, the I am moment. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no way to talk our way into that. Right.
Exactly. This is not an intellectual process that we can appreciate intellectually. Hello? What happened?
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just sharing the screen because we just have a few minutes left. So this is
Okay.
our signal to start wrapping up.
All right. All right. Well, and Van Dorn, any more on that?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Then if we got time, I wanted to wrap up with what I like to wrap up with because this is for me a spiritual practice, and that is to read the thing that was a channel to me years ago called "What Is Love."
Sure.
That's okay. All right, folks. For those who don't know, this is something that came to me back in January 11th, 1992. I was in a state of some confusion, more so than usual, and so I was looking for a coherent statement about love, and something had come up in my life that I felt that I needed something more coherent than what I was dealing with at that point. And I tried to do a personal writing meditation to find an answer, and I literally worked around the clock for about 48 hours and came up with a bunch of gibberish that didn't get me anywhere. And so I surrendered, and I went to bed about 12:30 at night. I asked my guides, please help me on this. I've given up on being able to come up with it on my own. And thank you in advance for helping me move the ball along on this. And so 3 hours later, 3:30 in the morning, I was awakened and instructed to get a pen and paper, and take down dictation. And this is a verbatim transcription of what they told me in response. They said, we have the answer to your question. Get ready to write it down. Take it down word for word. And this is what they said. In answer to the question, what is love? Most people think that love is good and that bad things like hate, fear, anger, envy, greed, deceit, etc., are the opposites of love or evidence of its absence. They are neither, however. The truth is, love has no opposite and is never absent. Love, like life itself, is simply all that is, nothing more, nothing less. Those chimeras some call love's opposites are only love's masks and mirrors, souls as yet unawakened to its true nature and their own. Each of love's supposed opposites can be defined, but who can define love? No one, because, like consciousness, love defines us. We do not define it.
Right.
Love is the perfect unison within all apparent polarities and guides us in all we do and are, even as we least suspect it. Love enables us to recreate and relive past patterns and to relinquish and transcend those patterns when we are finally prepared to accept and embrace the fullness of the present. Love is at once ubiquitous and inescapable, and it nurtures and sustains us in infinite, unseen ways that always exceed the wildest of our expectations, the clearest of our perceptions, the profoundest of our judgments. Love cannot and never will be captured by the words of any language we conjure or create to describe or limit it, even by calling it good. More intriguing, more compelling, and to some more baffling than the greatest detective story ever told, love at every moment offers at our fingertips clues of its imminent caress, just as cosmologists have discovered that the quintessential nature of time is translinear. The essence of love, once discovered, is transpolar and omnipresent. The more we knowingly experience love's seamless tapestry in our lives, the more wonderfully mysterious its intricate and elegant handiwork become. Love is, beneath all, the deepest mystery of who we are and all that is, and one we shall never fully unravel, no matter how much light the windows of our awareness may shed upon it. Hail to the mystery.
Wow.
So
Hail to the mystery.
That's so beautiful. Where'd that come from?
that was from my channel to me by my guides on the morning of January 11th, 1992, between 3:30 and 4 a.m. in the morning.
There you go.
And you know, I the only thing I've done to it is edit it so I wrote it as one paragraph first, writing it by hand, and I put it into more of a laid it out like a poem or something, even though it's really not a poem. And but I still read it religiously, if you will, and oftentimes read it by myself aloud because it resonates so deeply with me and has gotten me through lots and lots of situations that I would have needed some help if I didn't have this to go by. So it's been kind of a compass for me ever since.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Tom. That was just a beautiful way to end this this talk, which was so illuminating. And want to thank everybody for joining us, and to remind you that our next event of this practice series will be Wednesday, September 6th, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. It's about signs and synchronicities. And just a reminder that we very much appreciate your support to continue this program. And if you're feeling so moved, we'd appreciate a donation of any amount at sanctuaryoferarth.org. Thank you, Tom, for this great talk. Thank you, Tina, for launching us. And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight.
Namaste, everyone.
Thank you. Namaste.
Namaste. Hail to the mystery.
Yay.
Exactly.
Good night, everyone.
Okay. Good night. I mean, bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, good.
Hail to the mystery.